Does It Matter by Richard Leakey. Richard Leakey of 1944, a Kenyan paleoanthropologist, conservationist, and politician, has held many official positions. He has been the director of the National Museum of Kenya, head of the Kenyan Wildlife Service, and cabinet secretary and overall head of the Kenyan Civil Service. Leakey is credited with putting an end to the elephant slaughter in Kenya, making international news headlines with the burning of a stockpile of 12 tons of ivory in 1989. Since 2002, he is a professor of anthropology at Stony Brook University, New York, and chair of the Turkana Basin Institute. He is also the founder of Wildlife Direct, a registered charitable organization established in 2004 to provide support to conservationists in Africa. In 2007, he was elected as a Fellow of the Royal Society, London, and was awarded the Isaac Asimov Science Award in 2013 by the American Humanist Association. The essay Does It Matter is the last of the 14 chapters in Leakey's book, The Sixth Extinction, in 1995, co-authored with Roger Levin. The essay begins with a reference to the Simon Ehrlich wager and the two opposing views on the need to preserve biodiversity. The essay begins with a reference to the Simon Ehrlich wager and the two opposing views on the need to preserve biodiversity. Leakey elaborates on the three important areas of the value of biodiversity: economic, ecosystem services, and aesthetic pleasure, and agrees with Leigh Kaufman that the loss of any species erodes the human soul. He further stresses the need to sustain ecological diversity, stating that our ignorance of the true nature of the input-output relations or interactions between species may lead to an erroneous assessment of their values in an ecosystem, causing irrevocable breakdowns upon their laws. Fossil records show that there have been several unpredictable and irreversible crises of life on the planet, and every species, including Homo sapiens, is vulnerable. While evolution is a powerful creative process that has restored diversity after each prior mass extinction, fossil records shows that there had been several unpredictable and irreversible crises of life on the planet, and every species, including Homo sapiens, is vulnerable. While evolution is a powerfully creative process that has restored diversity after each prior mass extinction, however, this does not mean that the one sentient creature on Earth, Homo sapiens, should not be concerned about preservation. On the contrary, humankind with no superior claims for self-preservation has an ethical responsibility to protect Earth's biota. Unlike the 5 previous extinction events, whose causes are not determined, the sixth extinction in progress is a direct result of human activity, making it critical that urgent efforts are made to halt the destruction of our planet's natural ecosystems. Does it matter? Paul Eldridge has an analogy for those who contend that because ecologists cannot say precisely how many species are endangered, it is premature to be alarmed about the putative impending collapse of biodiversity. It is like saying that people should not be overly concerned about the burning down of the world's only genetic library because the number of books in it is not known to within an order of magnitude, and fire modelers disagree on whether it will be half consumed in a couple of decades or whether that level of destruction might take 50 years. He wrote recently in a letter to Science. Apparently, a few scientists would never call the fire department unless they could inform it of the exact temperature of the flames at each point in a holocaust. I have my own analogy. Imagine that a giant asteroid is spotted on a collision course with Earth. Many people would be justly worried because such impacts are thought to have unleashed mass extinctions in the past. My reading of the logic of Julian Simon and his ilk is that they would argue there is no cause for alarm because theories of mass extinction as a result of asteroid impact are pure speculations and guesswork. No one has ever seen such an extinction happen. And anyway, the asteroid might miss. If there were some means of deflecting the asteroid, the cost of not doing so would be catastrophic, in the event that the Simon view turned out to be wrong. What are the costs of his being wrong about the sixth extinction? What would it matter to us and to the rest of the world's biota if half its species were to be pushed into oblivion sometime during the next century? There are several answers to these questions, depending on the time frame in which they are cast. One of them is that, in the long run, it matters not at all. Although true in a sense, and many anti-alarmists adduce it in their support. I will argue that such a response reflects an ignorance of patterns in the history of life and our place in them. In Chapter 8, I talked about the value of biodiversity and identified three important areas: economic, ecosystem services, and aesthetic. I won't go into this in any detail again here, except to say that where value can be identified, it follows that the loss of diversity represents the loss of that value. If animals and plants are a potential source of new materials, new foods, and new medicines, then the loss of species reduces that potential. If an interacting network of plants and animals is important in sustaining the chemistry of the atmosphere and the soil, the loss of species reduces the efficacy of these services. And if a rich diversity of species occurs the human psyche in important ways, then the loss of species reduces us in some ineffable way. A legitimate question in each of these three areas, however, is the following. Are all the existing species necessary for satisfying economic worth, ecosystemic services, and aesthetic pleasure? Or can some be lost without harm?
To Julian Simon, the answer is obvious, and he displays it in reference to the loss of species that occurred when settlers clear-cut the Middle West of the United States. It seems hard to even imagine that we would be enormously better off with the persistence of any such imagined species, he suggested in his debate with Norman Myers. This casts some doubt on the economic value of species that might be lost elsewhere. Simon's principal measures of value are economics and immediate practicality, as illustrated by a further remark he made in the debate. Recent scientific and technical advances, especially seed banks and genetic engineering, have diminished the importance of maintaining species in their natural habitat. I'll contrast this with a very different way of looking at the value of species in their natural habitat, made by Les Kaufman in a chapter in his book The Last Extinction. A piece of the American soul died along with the passenger pigeon, plains buffalo, and American chestnut. Although I would not argue that each and every species in the world must be saved, especially at the cost of maintaining human welfare, my sentiment is closer to Kaufman's than to Simon's. Humans evolved within a world of nature and an appreciation of, and need for, nature, a real and ineradicable component of the human psyche. We risk eroding the human soul if we allow the erosion of the richness of the world of nature around us. But suppose the human psyche could be nurtured through the trauma of an ecologically impoverished world. Suppose, too, that present or future technologies could provide us with all the material resources that we presently and potentially derive from the natural world. Would we be able to feed, clothe, and supply energy to an ever-growing population for the next 7 billion years, as Julian Simon contends? It is true that throughout human history, the material quality of life has steadily increased, even as the size of the population has increased. Guided by this history, Simon assumes that the same pattern can extend essentially indefinitely into the future, and that there is no limit to what humans can take from the world of nature without detriment to ourselves or to nature itself. In other words, he believes that our continued appropriation of nature is compatible with sustaining an equable natural world. History is, of course, a useful guide to the future, but it can also blind us to emerging realities. Science and technology have increased our creature comforts, of that there is no doubt. But those comforts may blind us to the reality of the global environment. Nurtured as many of us are in our artificial urban environments, we do not see the relationship between the inputs and outputs of the natural economy of the earth. The inputs and outputs are the interactions among species at all scales of life, from filaments of fungi nurturing the health of plant rootlets to the global chemical cycles of water, oxygen, and carbon dioxide. They are the ecosystem services to which I referred earlier, and they represent the tangible elements of the stability and health that emerge from the entire biota of the earth operating as a complex dynamic system. How exactly do health and stability emerge? We don't know. Can a system be reduced in size through eliminating a proportion of species in all ecological realms and still be effective? We don't know. Which are its most important components? We know this only incompletely. Which species or group of species can be removed without detriment to the system that sustains us and all living organisms? Again, we know this only incompletely. The degree of ignorance about the natural world upon which we depend is frustratingly large, but it is not total as I described in chapter 8. We do know that Homo sapiens is not exempt from the rules that govern the lives of all other organisms. In the face of ignorance about how much of current biodiversity we need in order to sustain a healthy Earth's biota, is it more responsible to say, 1. Because we don't know if we need it all, we can safely assume we don't, or 2. We recognize the complexities of the system and assume we do? The answer is obvious, because the costs of being wrong on the first count are enormous. In any case, many ecologists, extrapolating from the incomplete knowledge they have about the structure and dynamics of ecosystem services, believe that we do need all, or at least most of what we currently have. Through continued destructions of biodiversity in the wake of economic development, we could push the natural world over a threshold beyond which it might be unable to sustain. First, itself and ultimately us. Unrestrained, Homo sapiens might not only be the agent of the sixth extinction, but also risks being one of its victims. Humans live in the present. We look at the world around us and find it difficult to encompass change over great tracts of time. But the perspective of time is important if we are fully to understand the biological processes we are driving by our actions, and of course to see where our future as a species lies. We must therefore turn to the fossil record of life, for it alone can inform us of the dynamics of the living systems at time scales beyond our current experience and imagination. The most immediate message of the record about the history of life is that major catastrophic collapses of biological diversity can and do occur. Moreover, these crises in life's flow can be rapid, irreversible, and unpredictable. This should press home to us an important insight into the natural world of which we are a part. Species and communities of species are not infinitely resilient to external insult. They are vulnerable and they can disappear, to be lost forever. We acknowledge that mass extinctions can be precipitated by Earth's impact with extraterrestrial objects and by global changes of various kinds, but do not see ourselves as a potential agent in such biological crises. The daily cutting of tropical forests and encroachment of wild habitats is a less dramatic process than asteroid impact, but in the end, the effect is the same. Insidiously,
Mass extinction is occurring. In pursuing our own ends, we treat the world of nature as if it can withstand each of our assaults without harm, but we do so at our peril. The fossil record shows us that life has been a static phenomenon through Earth history, but rather is a dynamic process. Neither is it a steady progression, but rather is a dynamic process. Neither is it a steady progression, but rather is punctuated by mass killings, the victims of which, whether we are looking at individual species or group of species or ecosystems, are gone forever. The death of a species is the termination of a continuous chain of genetic links that reaches back billions of years. A unique genetic package vanishes from Earth's variety for good. Each time human action results in the extirpation of a species, collectively each of us bears a part of the responsibility for snuffing out a unique part of life forever. I take this responsibility very seriously. But report the anti-alarmists, look at the fossil record again, and you will see that species' lives are limited anyway, lasting between 1 and 10 million years on average. The longer lived species are among the less conspicuous creatures of our world. Those with shorter lifespan are the larger creatures, such as terrestrial vertebrates. Some species end their tenure in a steady grind of background extinction, others in the cataclysm mass dyings. With this perspective, say the anti-alarmists, attempt to save species may be wasting time, effort, and money because they will disappear over time, regardless of our efforts. As Stephen Jay Gould correctly retorts, this viewpoint makes about as much sense as arguing that we shouldn't treat an easily curable childhood infection because all humans are ultimately mortal. I'll return to this shortly, because it contains a vital element of an ethical argument that encompasses geological time and our place in it. The second major message of the fossil record is that evolution is a wondrously and powerfully creative process, one that rapidly fills the void left after each mass extinction. After all, the diversity of life in recent times is at an all-time high, the result of repeated bounce backs after 5 major biological crises and more than a dozen smaller ones. Often, the burgeoning of new species after extinction events all involves a transformation of the dominant form of life. We are in the age of mammals, which came into being after the demise of the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. And in this new age, primates have become the most extensively endowed mentally, with Homo sapiens at the top of that heap. After the sixth extinction is over, biodiversity will return, as it always has, assuming, of course, that the agent of destruction, the current behavior of Homo sapiens, passes. And if the past is anything to judge by, the diversity of life will be even more extensive than it is now. And who knows what evolutionary novelties may emerge? If nature recovers so boisterously following mass extinctions, then perhaps we shouldn't be concerned about causing one. The answer to this is that it depends on the time scale you're looking at. Mass extinctions are virtually instantaneous, occurring within a matter of years or centuries in the case of asteroid impact, to millennia or a few million years from earthbound causes. Recovery, however, is slow, lasting somewhere between 5 and 25 million years. Slow, that is, on a human scale. Slow, not only in terms of time as we can comprehend it as individuals, but also in terms of the expected tenure of us as a species. There is no reason to think that the 1 to 10 million year average lifespan that applies to other species should not apply to our own. Homo sapiens have been around for perhaps 1,50,000 years, so we might look forward to a further million years or so, being a large terrestrial vertebrate, unless, of course, our capacity for destruction hastens our end. Moreover, at some point in Earth's future, a giant asteroid or comet will slam into our planet, instantly extirpating the majority of species, perhaps including our own. Several small asteroids have passed uncomfortably close in recent years. They are harbingers of the inevitable, which, according to some calculations, will arrive about 13 million years from now. If, by an unusual chance, the descendants of Homo sapiens still thrive on Earth at that time, the aftermath of the impact could surely extirpate most, if not all, of their populations, and even if some do survive the initial impact, civilizations would certainly be shattered, perhaps never to recover. If there is one certainty that we can derive from an understanding of life's flow and the forces that shape it, it is that one day we and our descendants will be no more, and the earth and its inhabitants will go on without us. Many people find it impossible to contemplate a time when Homo sapiens would no longer exist. So they like to assume that we will break the biological rule and continue forever, or at least until our planet ceases to exist. Billions of years from now, when its atmosphere is burned off by an expanding sun. Julian Simon obviously believes so when he talks of our capacity to thrive for the next 7 billion years. He is blind to reality. There are those who cling to the idea that we can escape this end too by recourse of space travel and colonizations of other planets, in which case it matters like what damage we inflict on one planet we know can support us. Both are flights of fancy born of the arrogant belief that Homo sapiens is separate from and above the rest of the world of nature, and a belief in our invisibility. If we learn anything from the scrutiny of life's history and of the dynamics by which species thrive collectively, we learn that neither is true. I could argue, as others have, that we owe it to ourselves, to our children, and to our children's children, not to foul our nest, not to degrade the wondrous diversity of life upon which we depend for our survival and our soul. I could argue, as others have, that, as the one sentient creature on earth, we have a duty to protect the lives of all of Earth's species. I could argue, as others have, that all the species with which we share the world today have an absolute right to our protection simply because they exist. Each of these exhortations is valid, and separately or collectively, they represent an imperative to recognize our role in the Sixth Extinction and to hold the insidious mass destruction that is soon to push 100 species a day, 4 species an hour, into revolutionary oblivion. But I want to add a further imperative, one that derives from the perspective of the history of life on earth, not, as earlier, from a human-centered view, but from the view of the rest of nature's species. The sixth extinction is similar to previous biological catastrophes in many ways. For instance, the most vulnerable species are those whose geographical distribution is limited, those in and near the tropics, and those with a large body size. It is unusual in several ways, too, most particularly in that large numbers of plant species are being wiped out, which is unprecedented compared with past crises. But in the end, with the passage of 5, 10, or 20 million years, despite this and other distortions of the biota that will remain, rebound will occur. On geological scales, our planet will take care of itself and let time clear the impact of any human malfeasance. As Gould has put it. Why? Then, if it matters not at all in the long run what we do while we are here, should we concern ourselves with the survival of species that, like us, will eventually be no more? We should be concerned because, special though we are in many ways, we are merely an accident of history. We do not arrive on earth as if from outer space, set down amid a wondrous diversity of life, blessed with the right to do with it what we please.
We, like every species with which we share the world, are a product of many chance events leading back to that amazing explosion of life forms half a billion years ago, and beyond that, to the origin of life itself. When we understand this intimate connection with the rest of nature in terms of our origins, an ethical imperative follows. It is our duty to protect, not harm them. It is our duty, not because we are the one sentient creature on earth which bestows some kind of benevolent superiority on us, but because, in a fundamental sense, Homo sapien is on an equal footing with each and every other species here on earth. And when we understand the earth's biota in holistic terms, that is, operating as an interactive whole that produces a healthy and stable living world, we come to see ourselves as part of that whole, not as a privileged species that can exploit it with impunity. The recognition that we are rooted in life itself and its well being demands that we respect other species, not trample them in a blind pursuit of our own ends. And by this same ethical principle, the fact that one day Homo sapiens will have disappear from the face of earth does not give us license to do whatever we choose while we are here. If what I've been saying sounds idealistic, I will admit to it. My dual career as paleontologist and conservationist have given me a unique view on the value of life's diversity and the way it changes through time. But I also have a practical view which arises from seeing people struggle to survive by exploiting the only resources available to them, namely the natural world around them, aiding their struggle while halting the destruction of those resources is humanity's greatest challenge for the next century. It can be done, but only if the different needs of rich and poor countries are acknowledged. It will fail if the richer nations try to impose solutions that effectively free the citizens of the less developed nations in permanent poverty. For a long time, mass extinctions were a neglected subject of study because they were mysterious in many ways and, anyway, were thought to be mere interruptions in the flow of life. They are now recognized as a major creative force in shaping that flow, and they will surely continue to be so for billions of years into the future. Long after Homo sapiens and its descendants are no more. But much of the mystery of mass extinctions remains, specifically what exactly causes them. As David Robb wrote in his book, Extinction, Bad Genes or Bad Luck, the disturbing reality is that for none of the thousands of the well documented extinctions in the geological past do we have a solid explanation of why the extinction occurred. For each of the big five, there are theories of what caused them, some of them compelling but none proven. For the sixth extinction, however, we do know the culprit. We are. On Killing a Tree by Giv Patel. Giv Patel of 1940 is a physician by profession and a poet, painter, and playwright. He was born in Mumbai and was educated at Grant Medical College. He currently resides in Mumbai and practices medicine there. Patel's poetic works include poems and How Do You Withstand? Body and Mirrored Mirroring. His first play, Princess, was performed in 1971. He has written two other plays, Sawaksa and Mr. Behram. Also a well-known contemporary Indian visual artist, he has been part of exhibitions around the world, including the Menton Biennale, France in 1976, India Myth and Reality, Oxford in 1982, Contemporary Indian Art, Royal Academy, London, 1982, to name a few. On Killing a Tree, taken from the collection Poems, presents a clinical and systematic description of the procedure for killing a tree. Sardonic in tone, the poem criticizes the ruthless methodical way in which humans uproot trees which have taken years to come into being. Unmindful of these ecological processes, humans cut them down.
However, the regenerative power of nature resists and revives. Until its connection with the earth destroyed entirely, on the surface that poem appears to be about how to kill a tree, but in reality it is an outcry against human attempts to overcome nature and a reminder that nature rebounds even in the face of mass extinction. The job of killing a tree is not over as long as its deepest roots, its intimate relationship with nature, are not pulled out. On killing a tree. It takes much time to kill a tree. Not a simple jab of the knife will do it. It has grown, slowly consuming the earth, rising out of it, feeding upon its crust, absorbing years of sunlight, air, water, and out of its leprous hide, sprouting leaves. So hack can chop, but this alone won't do it. Not so much pain will do it. The bleeding bark will heal, and from close to the ground will rise curled green twigs, miniature boughs, which, if unchecked, will expand again to former size. No, the root is to be pulled out of the anchoring earth. It is to be roped, tied, and pulled out, snapped, or pulled out entirely, out from the earth cave, and the strength of the tea exposed, the source white and wet, the most sensitive hidden for years inside the earth. Then the matter of scorching and choking in sun and air, browning, hardening, twisting, withering, and then it's done. Hugger, A Story of Woman and Water by Sarah Joseph. Sarah Joseph, from 1946, is a leading feminist writer in Malayalam and the founder of Manushi, an organization for women thinkers. She served as a professor of Malayalam at Sanskrit College, Pattambi, and is a well known social worker. Her literary career began early as a poet, but her fame rests mostly on her fictional output, short stories, and novels. Her works include Papathara, Kadinde Sangeetham, and Nanmathinmagalude Vriksham, collection of short stories, Alahiyude Penmakkal, Mattati, or the trilogy of novels, and the novel Adi, Gift in Green. She has received the Kendra Sahitya Academy Award, the Kerala Sahitya Academy Award, and the Vayalar Award for Alahayude Penmakkal. She has also won the Muttathu Varki Award and Padma Prabha Literary Award. In 2015, she returned the Kendra Sahitya Academy Award to protest ideological suppression and violence against writers and thinkers. The following extract comes from Chapter 2 of Sarah Joseph's novel Gifts in Green. The novel has for its theme water as a fundamental giver and preserver of life. A ritual storyteller visiting a community in Ati narrates the story of Hagar and Ishmael and their miraculous survival in the hostile desert where Abraham had abandoned them. The mysterious appearance of a bird reveals a water spring that becomes the elixir of life for her, and for the settlement that eventually comes up around the lake that the spring forms. Hagar becomes the keeper and protector of the lake as she knows the true meaning of that precious first drop of water. What the story underscores is that we take nature and its gifts of water for granted, and that if one is to have life and prosperity, water must be valued. It is also a story about a woman's endurance and a boundless generosity. According to the author, the novel was inspired by the myths and ethos of the island municipality of Valantakad in Kerala. Hagar, A Story of Woman and Water. Hagar, the mother of Ishmael. That day, waking her and her son earlier than usual, her husband thrust into her hands a few loaves of bread, a small quantity of dates, and a goatskin full of water. Follow me, take your son too. He mounted his camel. He stepped out,
walked ahead, and led them to the wilderness where the mountains were bare and the landscape bore thorns and thistles. A sandstorm raged continually. Leaving them there, he turned and began to walk away. "Are you leaving me here forever?" she cried out in panic. He did not turn back. "Why do you abandon your child and me in this terrible, lonely wilderness?" He did not stop. "What wrong have I done? Tell me that at least. Don't I have a right to know?" Hagar screamed after him, but received no reply. She could only see his red robe lifting and fluttering in the desert wind. Heartbroken, she fell to the ground and lay there prostrate. Except for a few dates in a half-full water-skin, I have nothing. The sun spits fire on me and my child. I am singed within and without. The burning sand roasts my feet as though I am standing on a red-hot span. You, who walk away from me, won't you tell me how I am to take care of your firstborn? Beyond the mountain, the last glimpse of his red robe was fading out of sight. Hagar mustered all her strength and yelled at the top of her voice, "Did your God order you to do this?" Atop the mountain he stopped and turned back. "Yes, this is the will of God. The God who led me to your bed and willed the river of life to flow. Won't you, for life's sake, to that God listen? Or was the will of God to you then, as now, an alibi and little else, for your importance as a man?" Clasping the baby to her bosom, she stood watching him as he descended the other side of the hill and disappeared out of sight. To hide herself from the heavy sandstorm that beat upon her, she sank to the ground, nestling the baby under her. When the gale subsided, the baby began to scream in terror on seeing her dishevelled, her face, her hair, and her head cloth all covered with sand. Her tears had dried up, as also the milk in her breasts. Dehydrated, her blood had begun to thicken. Every stream within her that had flowed ceaselessly like the unending mercies of God was drying up too. Hungry, Ishmael began to cry, "My son, before this blazing heat dries up my breast, drink to the last drop." She cuddled the baby to her bosom. Ishmael's hunger was not assuaged, nor his thirst. He stared at her in terror. Late into the night, hungry and weak, he cried himself to sleep. Who would abide with her through the terror of that lonely night, in that scary wilderness that flayed her with fear? Who could comfort her? Her body trembled with exhaustion, and her mind quivered with anxiety. The sky above her only ceiling, all around her the wilderness, a vast, wall-less mansion that afforded neither provision nor protection. The mercy of your father's God is spreading blankets of darkness on the walls of the horizon. To keep us warm, my son. She tried to comfort the baby whose jaws were chattering in the biting cold of the night. Far into the night, a piercing wind continued to blow. The sand that had glowed like coals of fire in the day hardened into shards of ice at night. Within the folds of her robe, against the warmth of her bosom, Hagar hid her son. In the darkness of this terrible night, wintry winds howl and needle me. Oh, open not your cavernous mouth, you hungry desert loneliness, to swallow my baby. Though tortured by thirst, she did not so much as moisten her lip with a drop of the water on which she knew hinged the hope of her son's survival in the burning heat of the following day. Despite the hunger that tormented her, she did not touch even one of the few remaining dates. The feeble light of the stars only deepened the loneliness of the wilderness. Now and then, like long, deep sighs, the dust storms continued to blow and buffet her. The short night came to an end. Somehow, the long day began. Having blazed as much fire as it could, the sun hid himself behind the sand dunes to the west. For a while the sand remained like cinders of fire. Again night came, needling her with biting cold. The water ran out. Racked with thirst, her son began to scream and howl. Gradually, his voice became weaker. It petered out into a feeble cry like the choked kee-kee of a bird whose neck is being wrung. She squeezed out the last remaining drops from the water skin and moistened the parched lips of the baby. He cried all the more. Would it be her son first, or would it be she? Who would be the first to die? Hagar shuddered at the thought of having to dig a pit with her bare hands to bury him in the sand, and then wandering about in the wilderness all alone. But what if she were to die first? That terrified her even more. How could this be the will of God? Hagar trembled at the thought of her child crying in terror as he helplessly watched the vultures feasting on her dead body, on crawling in the burning sand in search of her. No, no, it could not be. There had to be something far greater. Hagar got up. The God of the one who disowned was also the God of the one disowned. She had to seek and find the wellspring of life. Hagar began to wander about, struggling against the creeping hopelessness that tormented her. She crawled up and down the dunes, collapsing to the ground every now and then, exhausted. The whimpers of the bay continued to lick her heart like tongues of fire. She pleaded, to the sun blazing mercilessly, to the gale blowing, deaf to the cry for compassion and justice, to the endless stretch of sand that pricked fire into her exhausted, staggering feet. Show a little mercy, give me a little more time, be kind. In truth, my child, a woman it was, who cast you into the plastic will of your father's enigmatic God. That God now wills, he says, to discard you to a dusty death in this waterless wilderness. As a woman, it's not in me, my child, in God's name to let you die. With the last drop of my ebbing strength, strength of body, mind, and soul, for your life I'll fight and keep faith. You must survive, and survive you shall, the firstborn of the dispossessed. The giver of life will water give, for God is life, and life water. Afternoon, Ishmael suddenly became unusually still. Thinking him dead, she laid him by a bush and stood nearby, numb and motionless. Her heart-broken cry, welling up from deep within, died as though ripped in the middle. Did she hear someone call her by name? Who is it? Is anyone out there? Who are you? To have come to my help? It was the voice of her own desperate bewilderment that she had heard. The wilderness, frighteningly vast and lonely, was all there was. In the depths of sorrow and despair, she lay prostrate, covering her baby. At once, she heard her baby whimpering and again someone calling her by her name. She grabbed the baby from the sand and dashed here and there, seeking the voice that had called her. Could it have been only the clamor of her own heart's desperate hope? The fragrance of whose wind-wafted mercy was it that enveloped her? Who could it be, my God, in this terrifying solitude? Willing all her strength to her legs, Hagar groped and wandered about in the wilderness. Who? Where? Then, as in a dream, she chanced upon the source of the sound, a mysterious bird near the bush, flailing the ground with its wings. Hagar, Hagar, Hagar. Its downy feathers lay scattered all around. Blood speckled its wings, but heedless, it continued to thrash about, determined to knock the earth open. Hagar stood transfixed as a spring gushed forth from the earth, like water squirting from the eyes of a pierced coconut. Incredulously, she stood and watched the bird drinking the water ravenously, dipping again and again into the pool around the spring and juddering its wings in joyful celebration. In a flash, Hagar ran back, screaming, scooped up her son, flew to the spring and immersed her son in the water. Trembling, she poured a palmful into his mouth and immersed him in the pool again and again. The flow of water continued undiminished, the source spouting more and more fresh water. Hagar soaked herself in the stream until in her breasts she knew the miracle of water turning into milk. She settled on the banks of the small lake that lay between the barren hills and the thorny bushes. It was a bird near the water springs. She remembered gratefully that had led her, like the wing beat of life itself. To this water source in the desert, she felt humbled by the ways of God. Hearing of the water source, nomads and deserts tribes came in search. They saw the lake, saw sitting on its bank a woman with a baby in her lap. May we too drink from this? The nomads asked her. Hagar nodded assent. And settle down near the banks? The tribes asked. Hagar could understand the thirst of a people, the infinite value of water, and the secret of life scripted into it. She said, I have no objection. But you must know that water is life itself. I shall be the caretaker of this water. Guard it and mother it for the sake of my child and for the sake of the children yet to be born. This water you shall have, but only if you agree to a covenant. I insist on this not in a spirit of power or of ownership, but in the name of life. I know the value of water. To me, the value of the first drop of water is the value of the life of my firstborn. You stand excited, seeing an ample source of fresh water here before you. But you know nothing of the value or meaning of the first drop of water. Its coolness that flowed into my soul like the assurance of life itself. Others may not know the first drop of water, but I do. And I can't forget what it means. Not a drop of water shall be wasted. I won't allow it. The nomads agreed. They sensed her earnestness and they were desperate for water. We acknowledge you as the protector and caretaker of the water. We'll gather food for you. Only give us the water we need. The day the desert witnessed the birth of a water covenant, the nomads fed her and the child. They, in turn, bathed and drank water to their heart's content. With the plentiful water, Hagar knew they could cultivate vegetables near the lake. Working together, they reaped a joyous harvest. Harvests hatched festivals. In due course, a people came into being.